Paul Doherty, welcome to the podcast. Do you mind giving us a bit of a rundown about yourself and what you guys do at the Digit Group?
Sure thing, and thanks for having me on here, Alex. So it was a pleasure to be talking with you. Yeah, my name's Paul. I'm a recovering architect. I'm part of a 12-step program with that. But I actually grew out of being a builder that became an architect, and then I went into the owner's side of things. I run a real estate development group. It's boutique. It's global. Although we get involved with very unusual type of real estate developments because most of the ones that we do, either design, construct, or operate, is usually on behalf of governments, royals, those types of folks at leadership levels. And it's been known as smart cities. So I've been really blessed with being able to take a lot of the experiences that I've had with technology, with innovation and that type of thing, and scale it to a point where we focus not so much on the technology and the innovation, because that's just part of a tool set. But literally, when I start a project, I bring a cultural anthropologist to actually collaborate with first, learn about the people, learn about that specific location and all the variables that help make that place special. This also goes for existing cities. How do you start to integrate and have people adopt and adapt to technological change? Because people don't like change. I mean, they like to change their underwear, but that's about it, right? But at the end of the day, we're having a ball. Of course, there's a huge focus on the urbanization issues. Just look at the migration that's happening in Europe and elsewhere, where they did not look at the people first and look at the chaos in certain countries that caused. But we also have an arm, so we deal with design, we deal with construction, we deal with operations, and that goes for everything from public safety to education to healthcare. But what I love doing is when you start to integrate some of these innovations, it gives you a pause because you're like, wait a second, look at what this is really doing. That's where my background as an architect, being able to think big picture and then go right into detail, that macro micro way of looking at things has really been beneficial, across the board. We operate right now primarily in China, in the Middle East, sometimes in Europe, but mostly now in the US, especially since COVID. We're only 32 people, but we carry a powerhouse of projects right now that you may have heard of Neom over in Saudi Arabia. It's that new city from scratch. I was part of a subject matter expert team with McKinsey and Company that was designing a document and a plan called Vision 2030 for the royal family to have as the oil runs dry, what does Saudi Arabia do? And they're doing a good job of implementing across many different sectors, but my job was to write a chapter of the city of the future, and it was Neom. So, I'm pretty proud about that. But we also get involved with smaller projects. We're doing a museum right now in Miami, and we're showcasing it as a way of not fighting climate change, but embracing it. Because we know that downtown Miami is going to be underwater in the next 20, 30, 40 years. Fact, right? That's science. What we're doing is that we're actually having 1/3 of our museum in Biscayne Bay, which is the adjoining body of water to downtown Miami. And we're going to have scuba diving to go into these different curations. The other 2/3 is going to be underground. We're actually doing a reverse bathtub in order to fight the rising sea levels. We're also showcasing as a way of what's called generative design. Not sustainability and resiliency and all those tired words, but regenerative design, allow nature to heal itself. So we've partnered up with Jacques Cousteau's grandson. His name is Philippe Cousteau, and between him and his wife, Ashlyn, they host his grandfather's vision of saving the ocean, saving the seas and that type of thing. But they do it now in the spirit of our age. And they run it on Discovery Channel and Nat Geo, so he's very well known. He taught me about this thing about regenerative design. So up along the seawall of our museum, we're going to be literally recreating the coral reef that's been destroyed over the past 200 years and allow that to be the mangroves and the way that we can start to help nature heal itself. So that's a little bit about what we do. We're at a point now where we don't like to work with jerks. We don't work for or with jerks, and I feel really proud about that. Firing a client is great because they're like, wait a second, I fire you. Yeah, bye bye. But other times it's also taking up a cause, and not the cause because of cause sake, but because it has real meaning. I like to take the viewpoint that there's only three things that the human race needs to survive on this spaceship of ours, this planet Earth. Earth is always going to be fine because it's just Earth, right? We should not be worried about that. We should be worried about ourselves, which means that we need fresh water, we need safe food, and shelter. That's the only three things we need to survive. So I really feel that, the design construction industry, the built environment, provides that three-legged stool, that third leg that's so important that I hope that my fellow colleagues in the industry take it as a noble cause. Be proud because we're doing something that's saving the planet for humans.
Awesome. So, a few different things we could go into there, but I'm really keen to hear about your, early journey in terms of some of the early companies that you were involved in, and then some of those successes. So, I guess tell us about some of those early companies, and what were the successes there that we spoke about before the podcast.
I could also talk about some spectacular failures too, but
Go for it. Go for
because
it.
that's how you learn, right? That's
Exactly.
how you learn. Well, I have a very funny but interesting background coming right out of high school, right? So I went to Harvard's Graduate School of Design. It was a program of what's called career discovery. So literally the next day after I graduated high school, I was at a graduate school of design at Harvard, right? Learning, is this what I want to get into? And I fell in love with it. Just everything about it, the storytelling, the fact that it's beyond you, what you're doing as an architect. You're leaving something that your great-great-great-grandchildren can see, There was that really cool part about it, that existential energy, right? But after my second year of school, diving deep into architecture and the whole bit. I'm also a classically trained pianist. So I was standing in line at the registrar's line, because that's what you had to do back in the day. You had to fill out by hand and go to the registrar's office and hope the classes were open, right? There was this guy, he had sheet music. And he was doing, trying to put the notes in the right place. He was driving me crazy because he was awful at it. And so I tapped him on the shoulder and said, give me your pencil. And I showed him how to do it right. He said, how'd you know that? Blah, 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 blah. Winds up that he was a sound engineer in Manhattan. And he said, that there was this band that just needs some help this weekend because their keyboard player just left. Would you mind sitting in? So I sat in. I quit school that Monday. And we got signed to Warner Brothers Records. We were called Carl and the Passion. And from there, I got pushed into the music scene. So I said, forget architecture, forget the built environment. This is wild. I'm like, 19, 20 years old. Wow, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. There you go, right? And it's in Manhattan. But we became the lead band for a place called the China Club, which was very popular back then in the late 80s. And subsequently, I got pushed into, playing with others. I played with David Bowie's band, played with Frank Zappa's band, did the bed tracks for Julian Lennon's first album. So it was an amazing experience. Fortunately, in life, sometimes things happen very quick, and we just didn't make it over the top. But we made it, top 5 in Europe with our songs and blah, 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 but just wasn't good enough. So I went back to school. And this is where things get interesting because I started to do really well at school because all of the friends I went to school with, I'm 3 years removed, right? Because I went into the music industry. And from there, I focused really hard and I got good grades. So they offered me to start getting my internship hours to be a real architect while I was in school. So I would take off a semester and work, go back to school for a semester. And I worked not with another architectural firm, but IBM. And IBM was the only game in town back then. Right. So I became their designer for trade show booths. Now, this becomes really interesting because I started to see that other equipment manufacturers are really what made up computers. Right. IBM never made the motherboards. They outsourced it, or the graphics cards, or the GPUs, or whatever it was. Right. And also then I learned how to pull these things apart, put them back together again, how to learn about networks. I also learned how to get software into it because I was designing trade show booths, showcasing the best of to all these millions of people, right? So I had to work with these startup companies that wanted to make sure that their software was on IBM equipment because IBM was the gold standard for business. So there was this one startup called Microsoft. There was another startup called Adobe, Corel, and all these different groups. So what happened was we were able to make sure, excuse the dogs, but I'm actually from home today. But at the end of the day, we had this amazing, I had this amazing epiphany that if other equipment manufacturers make up computers, isn't that what a general contractor does with a home? He doesn't, he has to buy all the equipment to actually make it work and assemble it. So I've always had this idea that couldn't a building be a computer? And could we not take some of the learned knowledge of that entire thing, like networking different buildings together? Why don't we do that for safety and security, entertainment? So this has been this big push of mine ever since I was a kid, going, why can't we do this? And I'm at that point now where it's like, we've done really well, except that there are gaps sometimes that just annoy me. And one of those was this idea of drawing, right? The design intent from an architect to a constructor, right? And at the end of the day, what we had was this ability to actually create 2D abstract blueprints of how you build the built environment. And I said, why, we live in a 3D environment, we think in a 3D environment, why are we still drawing in 2D as an abstract? All that does is create more work for lawyers because it's all interpretation, right? So we created this technology called building information modeling, and we created a company. We called it Revit, and it got purchased by Autodesk. It's now the #1 software in the world used by architects, engineers, and contractors. So I feel very proud about that. We also have some other exits that, for facility management that were in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and I was very successful with that. But now I've pulled it all together, Alex, where we're at a point now where those early successes now are almost the experience level and the reputation is good. But now people will listen to where we're going next, right? It's almost like you want to follow success, right? And we've been fortunate that way. So what happened was I got introduced to this guy named Remy Arnault. He had just sold his software to Google. You know it as Google Earth. He became my chief technology officer. And he said he really did not like Google Earth because it was it was dumb. Even Street View or, sliding into being in outer space and coming down to your home. Those are all images that you have to attach data to. He wanted to have the data drive the geometry. So we created a tool, we called it Orbi. And from Orbi, IBM wanted to buy us. I said, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And I got a project in China. I said, I'm going to use this tool there, and let's see what happens, because it's browser-based. It's not just one building. It's an entire city I can fit in a browser, and it did fantastic things of visualization. It was great storytelling, right? At the same time, IBM had a program called the Smarter Planet, Smarter City, Smarter Building program. So they said, okay, how about we license this from you? And we started to build smart cities in China. That's where all that came from. And from there, I was able to leverage, again, my network. I'm fond of saying that there was a documentary made of me called Forrest Gump, and it's true. I don't know how I meet these people, but you do, and I guess I got a personality they kind of want to hang with, and you become friends, and now they're nation leaders. President Xi over in China, President Trump over here in the U.S., MBS, Mohammed bin Salman over in Saudi, and of course the Al Nahyan family, the ruling family in the UAE, and various other folks, like in Africa. I've now been introduced to the new president of Ghana. I'm just a kid from New York City. How the hell that happened? I really do have imposter syndrome most times. I'm expecting, like, I'm in these big meetings, they're talking like really high level stuff. I'm expecting like a person to tap my shoulder going, son, you need to get out here. But here we are, right? So because of those relationships, I'm able to do cities at scale because there's trust, which means that when we start a city, we do it not from a technological or, an urban layout or even innovation. Those will happen, but it's about telling the stories of the people that are going to be living there. So that's why I work very closely with cultural anthropologists, make it a human-centric but data-driven environment. It's a very, very important thing there, which means that, now that we've been doing this for decades, that world of data now is important to everybody all of a sudden. All of a sudden, like out of nowhere, artificial intelligence comes out and it's all about the data. Why? Because if you're using bad data, you're going to get hallucinations, which is what most people get, right? Now, what we're doing is saying, no, AI by itself, you're always going to be hurting because no one has perfect data, but you can get better data if you use things like blockchain. So we use a lot of smart contracts that way because that means it's immutable data. It's not like a field in a PDF document. It's written into the source code. So you can't change it, which means you got to trust it. And that's where we're starting to see some amazing, amazing leaps of how AI is a great companion. It is not an oracle. You don't prompt it and it comes up with the answers because that's the way that people are using things like GPT nowadays. What we're finding is that it can provide a pathway as a companion on a journey. And that's where we're starting to see some real product come out where we're able to not do all the grunt work all the time now. HR, finance, marketing, all these other things now. The back office is kind of taken care of. We have this thing called agents, AI agents. All agents is when you can, like in Microsoft Word, you can save as, print. That each one of those is like an agent. It does a very specific thing, right? Sometimes they're even disposable, which I love, right? But the ones that you do keep, the agents are doing a very, very good job of freeing up my time, which means that AI is making me more human. It is not going to take my job because I'm using it as a companion, a guide, to help me make proper decisions. But I'm the decision maker, not the piece of silicone and plastic. So at the end of the day, we're very enthusiastic about how these types of tools can be integrated into the built environment, even to the point that we can create deep fakes of buildings. Meaning, let's give them personalities. We started to see the first cow pass of this with things like Alexa from Amazon and Siri with Google. But even those tools now are coming around to being what my friend Joe Pine, an author here in the United States, calls a genius platform, where it starts to anticipate your needs because of your behaviors. And it recognizes that it should intervene or encourage or do things that you normally don't get from a computer. But what's really cool is how we're using the technology now to actually have our buildings communicate with us. Meaning that there's building management systems, building automation systems, these types of things. But with AI agents, I can have it have a British accent if it's a classroom, like it's like a Cambridge professor or something. Or I could have it like be just an introverted, dull person. That could be a storage facility, right? Because nothing really happens there, right? Or what happens if it's a high performance lab and we give it like a valley girl, like, oh my God, because it's chaotic, there's lots of things going on. Give it a personality and all of a sudden you're having, as the average person, a relationship with your home, your apartment, your office, your restaurant. It recognizes you, takes care of you. It understands, safety, understands security, understands entertainment. So I think we're reaching a really interesting thing here now where the tools are not just about production and getting work done. Of course you should experiment with that. What I love is these tools now I can weave into an experience. I can weave into storytelling to make it more compatible, to make it so that the spaces that we all live in come alive. It's a new form of having that relationship with the built environment that I'm really, really proud to be showcasing this in places like Abu Dhabi, like Miami and others. So yeah, man, as you can tell, I could talk the horns off a billy goat about all this stuff, but I just love what I do.
Amazing. So in terms of your current projects and everything that you've got going on, what are some of the key things that you're looking at and are really excited about? It could be projects that's happening or what you see over the coming years. Is there anything that really stands out for you?
Yeah, I learned a term from Jacques Cousteau's grandson, Philippe, about that regeneration, because now I'm starting to take a look at it where we have a geopolitical situation right now where AI is being seen like the space race of the 50s and 60s between the Soviet Union and the US back in the day. And now it's China and the US and who's going to win the AI war, because whoever takes over AI could determine a lot of things, and it's a serious issue. So I've had some discussions with some of the hyperscale companies, specifically Google, where I made friends with Dr. Carolyn Golan, who's in charge of energy policy and that type of thing, which is directly related into their data centers, right? So all these promises of supercomputer data centers and, we're doing this and mine's bigger than yours and yada, 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 that stuff is still there, right? But she has a real practical problem. If she commits to building these hyperscaled data centers because of political policy and national interest, this goes beyond Google as a company, right? This becomes a national security issue. But there's not enough energy being generated in the United States to actually take care of these data centers that are promised. So she's a renewable person, just loves the renewables. That's where she's been pushing and guiding as her role in Google at the top level of Google, right? She's thinking that she may have to break down and do fossil fuels, right, to actually generate that energy, because it's quicker to build those type of facilities rather than a nuclear plant or hoping that something scales in the world of renewables. But one interesting thing happened. Back at the beginning of this year, most of Los Angeles burnt to the ground through a wildfire. And there's a lot of buildings that need to be rebuilt, both residential and commercial buildings. So there's this idea that is being promoted by Caroline about, well, if we can't build energy generation plants fast enough, why don't we leverage solar panels? The existing solar panels, the 1.0 generation, which has been going on for like the past 40 years or something, is a photovoltaic cell that actually goes right to the point of generation. You got to use it right away, which is why a lot of people use it to do hot water for their homes and things like that, right? But the next generation has batteries in the back end. Now things get interesting. Remember what I said about computers and I learned about networking? What would happen if we did hook the buildings together like a network, like the Internet of Buildings, but through the batteries? What we're petitioning right now to the city of Los Angeles is that when you when you get a permit, it must have one of these new generation solar panels with a battery underneath it in order to rebuild your home or rebuild your commercial property. If we're half right, we get a 500 megawatt power plant, a virtual power plant. That can be done within a year, 2 years, and all of a sudden we have energy. And then if other municipalities see that is very easy to do, but then it's a matter of making it enforceable. Holy cow. This means that each individual that owns a home or a business, you can actually have a purchase power agreement, or a PPA, that's what's known in the industry, to your local electric grid. So it becomes a revenue center. So, I mean, all these things check off, and it's going to be fascinating to see how humans either screw this up royally because of greed and everything else, or this is an aha moment going, oh, wow. And now you're not only getting paid to do the right thing, but you're part of a community now, right? Where your home is now part of a network. What else can we do? So that's what excites me, is like these headline grabbing disasters that can become opportunities. It's that whole thing of, do you want to keep the lemon or do you want to make lemonade?
Yeah, exactly. So, in terms of your company and where it's heading, obviously a lot of exciting things happening. What is the plan for the Digit Group, and what does the next few years look like with your company?
I think we're going to accelerate. We are accelerating the singularity of all the newer technologies so that it works as a ecosystem with humans, where you will not be able to differentiate a human or technology. That's called the singularity. And how then that becomes a way of providing superhuman powers to individuals. Things that are fantastical today that will just become commonplace. And what I mean by that is that I have an investment arm that is looking at 10 startups right now. They're post-revenue, pre-Series A, but they are having a tough time raising $500,000, $3 million, $5 million because it's below a threshold of where they need to go with other investors. But by pulling these together, I'm getting, I don't know, maybe a $25 million deal. But that may not be good enough. So what we're looking at is taking an approach where we can leverage cryptocurrency. But check out how we're doing this. The American Institute of Architects issues for the past 150 years templates for contracts. Contract between an owner and an architect, owner and a general contractor and subcontractors. And it is the industry standard here in the US. They account for 1.18 million projects annually every year. That's a lot of projects, right? So I've been taking a look at it, and I did an experiment where I took the different templates and I put them on the Ethereum blockchain. I've now made a smart contract. And again, I make a contract with Alex makes a contract with Paul. We both agree that's immutable data. That's just for agreements. But, blockchain is actually a general ledger. So what we're proposing right now is to make sure that when you use an AIA contract and it's blockchained, all invoices for that project go through the contract because it's a general ledger. So you submit your invoice, you're going to get paid, right? But I did something, I created almost like a portfolio of these 10 companies that do very different things with AI, but it enhances the data all the way through a project. Projects worldwide go pre-design, design, pre-construction, construction, and then facility management operations or home ownership, right? That's from a bird shed, like a birdhouse, all the way through a skyscraper. They all follow that workflow. So I identified these 10, including the contracts, right, on the blockchain. And I call it Building Elixir. So the Elixir, I've actually created through the Securities and Exchange Commission, a token. That acts like a bank. Because of every transaction that happens on my 1.18 million projects, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars if I just charge 1 US cent per transaction. That monetization then makes my token the bank. If you use the AIA contract on your project, I'm going to issue a project coin. That project coin is going to have its value based upon the value of the property and is written into the title. So now I have real real estate backed cryptocurrency. We're not talking Bitcoin and the tulips in Holland type of approach. This is solid, right? So, and people understand real estate. So let's say I'm an architect and I know that I've submitted my last invoice and I've just been getting cash. At the last invoice, I can say, you know what? My design was really good. I know it's going to raise the value of the property. I'm going to take a chance, and 10% of my last fee, I'm going to take as crypto. I'm going to be an owner of the digital asset. Now, all of a sudden, when that property's sold, you get a windfall. You're going to make more money than you ever did through architectural fees. So this is where we're working right now with introducing this to the U.S. Treasury. And then that would be a conversation that would happen where this new Trump administration wants to base part of the value of the U.S. dollar on crypto. That is public knowledge. That's what he wants to do. Because right now it's foreign exchange, a little bit of gold, but he wants to put crypto in there in order to, just raise the value. Guess who knows real estate real well? Donald Trump. So we're thinking this can be an amazing conversation that what we're doing is we're allowing the data to flow that's trusted to create the built environment. At the same time, we could be looking at valuing what we do through crypto into the US dollar. So we're swinging for the fences. It's kind of fun right now.
It does sound super exciting, Paul. And there's a lot going on at the moment in the world and with your company. And I could imagine there's a lot of moving parts, but how do you identify what to focus on and then just focus on that one thing? Because focus is very important, and I know it can be easy to get sidetracked, but how do you know what opportunity to really focus on?
Yeah, and resist the temptation of what's called the shiny keys, right? I think that, the thing that I always do is I ask, what are the consequential questions of that? what are the proper questions to ask that may not be answered, but ask the consequential questions of that. Sometimes, we're at a point right now as a company where we have the luxury of not having to chase every job. We pick and choose, and the things that would allow my curiosity to be itched, right? Being able to go in and say, wow, we can really make a difference in Saudi Arabia, and not shun them, but actually start partnering with them and show them proper ways of doing things, and that can be from, a moral, ethical standpoint sometimes. A case in point would be the Syrian refugees that are in Jordan right now. There's discussion right now about who's going to populate Neom, which is adjacent, like their borders are with Jordan. So the Syrians are up in the north part of Jordan. The idea is to bring them down into the south and slowly have them populate Neom as the new Neomites, because they have nowhere to go. These were doctors and lawyers and architects and nurses and all sorts of folks. They had real jobs, right? And now they're living like, what it does to their, to their mind, and, where they live in like, Red Cross tents, with not a lot of hope, no inspiration. What we're planning on doing is bringing them into Neom, and this directly affected my design. So you're saying, what triggers these things? We already had a very good design on how we were going to house people of Neom, but this was a big challenge for me because I lived in New York City almost my entire life, and there was these attempts at helping people that were poverty-stricken, like the way that these Syrian refugees are now. Right? They have nothing. And they created these things called the projects, which were high-rise apartment buildings that became hotbeds of crime, right? They were just designed improperly. It was a very scary place, even to this day, the projects, they call them. And it happened all over the world. I know in Dublin, there was still big issues with stuff like that. Actually, U2 wrote songs about it. It's where heroin use happened and whatnot. So I wanted to be careful about having the Syrian refugees come into a place that's brand spanking new, looks great, but are we creating a ghetto? Don't go there, because that's where the Syrians are, right? Now, how do you break through that? And what we've learned over time is that food is the great neutralizer, especially if you've never tasted another cuisine and yet you fall in love with it. Like, I'm Irish, but I love Italian food, right? I also like Chinese food, I like Japanese food, right? So food is that great neutralizer that doesn't bring the politics with it, right? Like, who's going to argue about pizza, right? Now, I can argue that Chicago pizza is, and New York pizza is number one, but, that's another story. But, but at the end of the day, what we figured out was that I can configure 4 families that share a common area, like a courtyard, and I have all the kitchens with operable windows facing the courtyard. So how you enter your home is to go into the courtyard and then go in through the front door. So you're going to pass another person's kitchen, and if they're cooking, you may smell something. Go, man, that smells great. What is that? Is there an opportunity for fusion? I mean, it brings people together. We also grow our own food within that courtyard. So we're dealing with people's behaviors and trying to neutralize the ability for people to bring their baggage into it and leave it at the front door, right? Being able to eat together, commune together. Now, does it work? Yes. Is it going to work 100% of the time? Absolutely not. My big thing is I don't want to engineer humans with their behaviors. I want to understand what those behaviors are so that I can create environments for collision. And collision does not need to be violent. It can be wonderful. So these are the things that inspire me. Wanting to see the situation that I may have some of the tools and some of the skills to at least make it a brighter day for that one kid that has no hope. And maybe, over time, as these families then start having more kids, these are the original Neomites, right? And I think it's a pattern of human history that when there's a tragedy, they move somewhere else and then they create their own stories, right? So yeah, I think we're in a great age. Yeah, there's chaos out there, and but when is there not? So I think that just keeping everyone that listens to this podcast. Yeah, man, I've had bad days where it's just like, oh man, I just don't see any way out. But guess what? Just keep swimming, just like from Nemo, right? Just keep
Yes.
swimming,
Yeah, that's
and you know what? It's gonna be all right.
That's it. That's it. Paul, coming to an end. I mean, it's been a great conversation. We could talk for hours. There's a lot that we could go into, and a lot of stories that you could share. That maybe for part two or part three.
Yeah, well, especially with my time living in Melbourne, we definitely have to talk about that.
Exactly.
And my trips to the
Australia, New
Barossa
Zealand.
Valley.
Yes, we can go into that, and all the wine and all that stuff. But in terms of wrapping up here, is there anything that you wanted to touch on? Obviously, people can find you on LinkedIn. They can Google you. I can link that in the description. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'm discovering something, and lately I've had the courage to talk about it. Public speaking at conferences and things like that. And it's about a word that has been weaponized. And I think that as I'm getting older, I'm realizing it's the only thing that really matters. And there was a lot of talk about Me Too and romantic stuff and yada, yada, yada. But the word love, I think that we need to bring it back into business talk, into real life, because having it weaponized and being used against people, that's not what the intent of the word is or the feeling, right? I love my job. I love my colleagues. There's no reason why we should not express that, because that is what makes the world go round. And as I'm getting older, it sounds like a cliche, but it's not. It's real, right? Religions are based upon it. So, not to get religious at all on this, but it's about learning how to be more human again. And again, as we get more time because of things like blockchain and AI and all these other tools and how they're going to be like literally creating superpowers for us, I'd love if we could have that conversation with each other about that word, and don't make it that it's a sensitive, oh, I don't need to go there. This isn't about romantic love. It's about love of thyself, love of the world, and just love what you do.
Totally. Love it, Paul. Mate, thanks for your time today. Appreciate your time, and
Thanks,
look
Alex.
forward to speaking soon.
Cheers.